This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me we're not telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Howdy, all. It's another bright and early morning here as I'm sitting down to record the Monday podcast. The prep before the prep. How do you prepare a pre-recorded Monday podcast? Well, in addition to recording the audio on Sunday morning, you then save the editing process for Sunday afternoon when you actually have time to sit down and do it. And then you promptly remember to set a timer to upload it to YouTube and Rumble afterward. Exactly like I did on Friday, where I totally didn't forget to do that. Anyway, it is the Five Starr Wrestling Report. At this rate, the gimmick kind of writes itself. The wrestling podcast no one knows but everybody needs. Somebody needs to come on here and set the record straight about the Monday Night Wars. It is not all that it's been chalked up to be. As we're finding out very quickly going back and doing these retro Raw archives, the glory era is far from glorious. That'll be the topic of today's conversation, where I present the question to everybody that grew up venerating the Monday Night Wars from the fall of 1995 to whatever year it was, spring of 2001, I guess, when WCW finally folded and Vince took home all the gold. The question of what exactly was it about this period that people hold with such high regard? Because it surely couldn't be the weekly television programs. Well, make sure you subscribe, comment, and like the podcast for me. Please and thank you. Come back to check out the show on Mondays and Fridays on YouTube or Rumble. Show goes up on both platforms, so pick your poison. Which platform is your go-to these days? I'm somewhat ashamed to admit, as much as Rumble's made progress in these last few years trying to be the alternative to YouTube's failing model of video streaming, God, the foothold it has over Rumble is still completely unmatched. And I'm sorry to say, but unless it's like a Louder with Crowder or somebody that deliberately censors their YouTube content in order to ensure they don't get deplatformed, and that's pretty much what Rumble is these days. It's the alternative conservative media platform. Which is great if you're somebody that likes that kind of content. But at some point you have to wonder if that's basically the only appeal to Rumble in 2026. It had such publicity and buzz when it launched in whatever year that was, 2021, 2022. I mean, I primarily use it as a backup service in case my YouTube channel goes to crap. I don't ever foresee that being the case. Nobody from the YouTube higher-ups is monitoring my channel. I don't have the subscriber base or the engagement factor to justify people coming after my show to try to deplatform it. But again, Rumble, I think, has kind of hit its ceiling in terms of growth beyond where it is now. And unless they try to cater or market to something outside its core demo of whatever you would call them, middle ground or conservative blue-collar male workers. Rumble's kind of stuck where it is. I still appreciate that it exists. It's good to have it out there, but it's very narrow-casted. I don't use it as my go-to video streaming platform. YouTube is still unfortunately more user-friendly and more accessible. It is what it is. But you all didn't come to hear me talk about Rumble or YouTube. You came to hear me complain about the WWF from the late 90s. So with that, let's do this Raw report then. Show's so bad, everybody. You have no idea. Man, I'm going back and rewatching these old pre-Attitude Era Raws. How in the world anybody ever thought this was a great period of wrestling is beyond me. These shows are atrocious. Absolutely hideous. I really took that In Your House pay-per-view for granted the other week. Because I watched this Retro Raw over the weekend and we were right back into the trenches. I keep saying, things are going to get better as we progress through the fall. I'm starting to think I might have to eat those words. Because the shows aren't getting any better. I even came home from work early on Friday. I just had no motivation to watch this thing. I was like, maybe I'll get a head start. Then it was like 4:45, and I'm like, if I don't start it now, I'll never get through it. Good news is I got through it. Bad news is I limped across the finish line. So the first thing we see on the show is them recapping how over the Hart Foundation was in Canada last week. And because they were in Shawn's hometown of San Antonio this week, we immediately knew who the bad guys were again. I did get a chuckle out of the wanted poster they drew up for the Hart Foundation. That was kind of clever. And so out come the Canadians, deep in the heart of Texas. They all got showered with booze from the jump. Brett talked about all the rats that exist. Not only the people sitting in the crowd, but even the boys in the locker room. He talked about the stipulation added to the contract for Brett's match with The Undertaker at SummerSlam, that if Brett doesn't win the belt, he'll never wrestle on American soil again. Owen talked about his upcoming match with Austin at the pay-per-view, which immediately brought back traumatic memories. I'm sure most of you know the situation that went down with Austin and Owen at SummerSlam 97. If, for whatever reason, you don't know, well, you can either look it up or wait until we review the pay-per-view in a few weeks. Now, one thing I do want to mention about SummerSlam 97, kind of an interesting gimmick theme they had going with this year's event. It was an 8-match card. Actually, no, not 8. 7, I believe. And with a lot of the main card or higher profile matches, they all had their own unique little stipulations added. There was Mankind versus Hunter in a cage. We had Goldust versus Pillman, where if Pillman lost, he'd have to wear a dress on TV until he won another match. We had Bulldog versus Shamrock for the European title, where if Bulldog lost, he'd have to eat dog food. Owen and Austin for the Intercontinental belt, where if Austin lost, he'd have to kiss Owen's ass. And of course, Brett versus Taker for the world title with Shawn as a special referee. and the added caveat where if Brett lost, he would never wrestle in the US again. And a lot of this was a take off the old Memphis style of booking, typically done on the big marquee shows at like the Mid-South Coliseum. They'd always have a handful of special gimmick matches to try and boost some extra ticket sales. And they'd usually be wacky kind of stipulation matches, similar to what they had going on here. I liked the idea on paper when the WWF did it. The problem, from what I remember, is that the majority of these stipulations or gimmicks never actually amounted to anything. Pillman, I remember, had to wear the dress. That was something they actually had followed through on. But I don't think Bulldog ever ended up eating the dog food. Austin obviously didn't kiss Owen's ass. Not that he would have been physically able to, considering what happened in that match. And it's not even like they false advertised anything. They just had a bunch of goofy, arbitrary stipulations that never had payoffs. So it was kind of a waste. And so after they went over all the stipulations for the Hart Foundation's matches... By the way, I have no idea what the hell Pillman was talking about during his promo. He basically called out Dusty and said he was a terrible father to Dustin. Promised that he would physically rip Dustin's heart from his chest. There was also a reference to drag queens here that I sort of tuned out. I did love Brett putting over how much better Canada was than the US. In order of him explaining such, their women are hotter, their sports teams are tougher, their beer tastes better, apparently these were not rattled off in any particular order of importance. And so that was the cue for Austin to come out. He also brought along Ken Shamrock, Sid Vicious, WWF newcomer The Patriot, and last but not least, Shawn Michaels. We'll come back to the Shawn thing in a minute. First, we have to talk about The Patriot. So, again, not having reviewed last week's show, if The Patriot didn't debut the other week, then this would have been his first official sighting on WWF TV. They just had him come out like a regular Jag. Very minimal fanfare. And for those of you that don't remember Del Wilkes, aka The Patriot, his WWF run was quite fascinating in the sense of he was there, he did some stuff, and then one week he pretty much vanished into the ether, never to be seen nor spoken of again. I don't think he lasted a full year in the WWF. I remember he came in, immediately feuded with Bret Hart for the title the month after he won the belt. Whatever they titled that September in your house. I think it was Ground Zero or something like that. So he did that. Lost clean, I believe, to Bret via submission in the sharpshooter. And then he toiled around mid-card purgatory for the rest of his run. He was the literal definition of just another guy on the roster. I, for the life of me, have no idea why they brought in Del in the summer of '97. Other than, we need another American hero gimmick to challenge the Canadian bad guys. I don't ever recall him really getting over. I do know they ended up using the same music for Kurt Angle when he debuted a few years later. But, yeah. That was their introduction to getting over Del Wilkes in the WWF. He's generic white dude under a mask with a semi-redneck southern accent. He didn't register on the same level as Austin. We'll put it that way. Oh, and by the way, Sid, also never seen on the show ever again. He came out, and for the rest of the 2 hours, he was not seen on television. Where did he go? Beats me. Sid's run in 97 is so baffling. This is like the 4th time we've seen him randomly show up and then disappear immediately thereafter. Anyway. Well, they cut to break after all the babyfaces came down to stare down the heels. And then they showed the headbangers on a golf course for God knows what reason. Then we went back to the ring for Jerry Lawler and Brian Christopher versus Ivan and Scott Putski. So, remember the TV angle they shot a couple weeks ago when Lawler and Christopher got heat on Scott Putski and damn near killed him with a botched power slam? Turns out that was all done to set up this tag team grudge match where they trotted out a 56-year-old Ivan Putski to team with his son, sing Bobby Vinton to zero reaction, and then wrestle a 5-minute TV squash that nobody cared about. I, for one, have seen a handful of Ivan Putski matches in my heyday. I never got the hype. A physically good-looking athlete who had the charisma of curdling milk. That was my impression of Ivan Putski in his prime. And the talent ran in the family too, because Scott Putski had even less charisma than Ivan did. Hard to imagine that's even humanly possible. So they had this incredibly boring match for several minutes. Scott sold the entire time until he tagged in his dad. Also, he could make a shitty comeback with windmill punches on the heels. And then he decked Lawler with a Polish hammer knockout for the pin. And to my knowledge, I believe that was Ivan's final sanctioned career match. A random throwaway tag in the middle of Raw for a feud that no one could possibly give two fucks about. So this sucked. Then they replayed the big angle from the other week, where Mankind made one last attempt at coming down to aid Austin. But after Austin lulled Mankind into trusting him to be his tag partner, he gave him the stunner and called him a stupid son of a bitch, which is the lead-in for what they ended up doing this week. Mankind vowed that after tonight, he would never be the same again. And boy, he wasn't lying about that one. Paul Bearer cut a promo in front of a giant metal garbage can, vowing that next week he would prove that Kane is alive. And my only other comment about this was, why was he cutting this promo leaning up against a metal can? I have no clue. Probably the same reason the headbangers were just randomly hanging out on a golf course in their man skirts. Then we had Taka Michinoku versus Tajiri Yoshihiro in a light heavyweight division match. I wrote, a New Japan Strong Style match in the middle of this fucking period of the WWF. On the same show where I saw the Headbangers in an all-time terrible match, not to mention Vader and Flash Funk. Highly comical. Funny thing is, I barely wrote anything down about the match. These guys did a bunch of really athletic, impressive spots for 4 minutes. That's the extent of what I jotted down. There was a point here where they were just killing each other with roundhouse kicks and open hand palm strikes to the head. That was probably my favorite part. Surrounded by the rest of the match, which was purely aerial stunts. Obviously, I think most people know who Tajiri is. I forget what JR said here. I think he was like 24, 25 years old. It's amazing because he still looked like a giant standing next to Taka. I don't know, man. They tried to build Taka Michinoku at 180 pounds. I still think they were being too liberal. If he was a $150, I'd be shocked. I don't know if there was ever a period where he was in the ring at the same time with Spike Dudley, but I'm putting money down right now that Spike Dudley might have been bigger than this guy. Christ, Taka was tiny. He could work. He was a really good athlete. But fuck, that guy was small. He still ended up going over with the Michinoku driver. Everything about this light heavyweight division still sucks. My mind hasn't changed on this topic. With that being said, compared to the rest of what we were getting on this show wrestling related, it was easily the best match in the entire 2 hours. Maybe with the exception of the main event. Although that was more angle driven than focusing on good technical wrestling. It was sure as fuck better than the next match I'm about to talk about. Oh, we did get a quick Shamrock interview where he was plugging his match with Jim Neidhart later on. And aside from my comment that he sounded like a drunk Gilbert Gottfried, the minute that he mentioned in his promo that his opponent later on was Jim the Anvil Neidhart, I began to sweat profusely. And had I not been in my apartment at the time of watching this show late in the evening, I might have been tempted with the urge to scream to the top of my lungs in fury. But I managed to contain myself. Up until the match happened, of course, and then I proceeded to scream with fury. We also had the Bariquas showing up in a lowrider and saying a bunch of stuff in Spanish. This also blew ass. And then we had the match. The fucking worst thing I've ever seen perpetrated on a wrestling television program in my lifetime. Dude. Okay. Objective question. Were Mosh and Thrasher always this fucking bad? They had the worst goddamn match I've ever seen with the Bariquas. God, this match sucks so bad. I still have no earthly clue who the hell anybody in Los Bariquas is not named Savio. Anytime the announcers mention Miguel, Jose, and or Jesus, I'm looking around like, who is who? I genuinely don't know. Miguel is the really hairy guy. That I did determine. Here's the issue with Los Bariquas, aside from everything. They're all out there in generic-looking matching gear. To this day, they've never been individually established on TV, outside Savio. They all look completely nondescript facially. And I know people immediately rain in with the racist comments because the interpretation there is that all Mexicans look the same. Only in this particular instance, because it is empirically true. Nobody stands out. They're all just guys getting involved in brawl warfare every week. And then there's the headbangers. These headbangers, dude. They're out there running wild at the beginning of this match. It literally looks like two guys in their first week of wrestling school doing spots. I have seen clips of backyarders with more coordination than these two. They hit a sloppy-looking double gore buster at one point that would have made Arn Anderson cringe. Ended up getting worked over for the heat, which is only good in the sense that it didn't involve Mosh or Thrasher actually doing spots. And then there was the four-way at the end where everybody looked like they were totally out to lunch and had no idea what they were supposed to do. My final note reads, one of the Boricuas pinned a headbanger with a victory roll of some description. And because the entire tag division right now consists of nothing but gang warfare and faction brawling, guess what took place after this hideous match? You guessed it. Faction brawling and gang warfare. The DOA came out on their bikes to help beat up and run off the Mexicans. Exact quote I wrote down, by the way. I also indicated, I have no idea who the fucking baby faces and heels are. And at the precise moment that comment crossed my mind, they cut away to a Patriot promo and I stopped caring. This truly is like the worst storyline in all of 1997. It is a feud comprised of nothing but underneath dorks getting into fights every week. That's all this feud is. Nobody's over. There are no good guys or bad guys. It's just a bunch of mid-carders coming out on television every week and having sloppy fights. And we wonder why none of this shit ever got over. And moreover, why none of it registers years after the fact. We all sit here wondering, why did we all forget about the DOA Los Boricuas Headbangers feud in the WWF? Well, I can answer that question. It was incredibly lame and completely forgettable. And nobody cared. And for the record, that Patriot promo that we had to abruptly cut away to, he literally said nothing of importance. He said he's here in the WWF to defend the pride of America and that he's going to stand up to Brett and the Hart Foundation. Cool. Glad they signed him. I just like how they unapologetically call him Del Wilkes. He's a masked character with red, white, and blue American attire. They're just blatantly calling him by his real name. That'd be like in Mid-South in 1983. They were just calling Mr. Wrestling 2 Johnny Walker every week. It'd be absurd. But that's exactly what the WWF was doing around this time. He was the Patriot Del Wilkes. Not just the Patriot. We had to inform the people at home watching. This masked guy has a real identity. It cannot be concealed. We have to let everybody know. It's a gimmick. Fucking idiots. So then we had Shawn Michaels come out for a promo. Stop for a minute. Let's rewind in the time machine for a bit here. Let's go back, say about a month. We have not seen Shawn on this show due to a real-life altercation that occurred between him and Bret Hart, wherein Bret had legitimately pummeled the shit out of Shawn before Raw went on air in Hartford, Connecticut. Because Shawn decided to stir shit up in the locker room and Bret finally had enough of his crap. And it led to a whole show-wide story over the next how many weeks, wherein they held a tournament to crown #1 contenders for the tag belts. Not to mention everything they've been doing with Mankind trying to buddy up with Steve Austin to be his tag partner so he could help defend the belts. That whole thing occurred because Shawn got his panties in a bunch over getting punked out by Bret. So he took his ball and went home and left the company high and dry. And I don't know if any of you remember this or not, but Austin's former tag team partner, one half of the former tag team champions in the WWF, yeah, that guy happened to be Shawn Michaels. So bearing all that in mind, everything they've done on television in the last several weeks to cover up for the fact that Shawn hasn't been around, well, now he's just back. Like nothing ever happened. He's just on the show, strutting around and pretending like everything's normal. That they didn't have to completely change all of their storyline plans in the last month because of this fucking prick. No, everything's hunky-dory. This was all according to plan. And so he comes out and, well, first, he addresses the main event later on and basically says, I'm good to fight no matter what. So if Austin wants to pick me as his tag partner, great. If not, I don't care regardless. Basically just flat out saying he never gave a shit about the tag titles and it means absolutely nothing to him. Wonderful. Then he talked about the main event for SummerSlam 97. And the whole setup here is that Shawn doesn't have a place on the card right now. So he gets down on his knees and begs for McMahon to let him be a part of the card. He'll sell tickets at the box office. He'll pass out concessions. He'll even set up the ring. He'll shine Vince's shoes. He just wants to be a part of the event. I would have loved to seen clips of Shawn Michaels actually setting up the ring. As if. And that whole bit, well, it led to nothing. He asked for Vince to let him be a part of the SummerSlam card. He passed the mic off to him. And then he did his goofy stripper dance for the camera and threatened to take off his shorts to expose his cock. That happened. I'm not making that up. Apparently Vince needs to simmer on the idea for a bit. Should we let Shawn Michaels be a part of SummerSlam 97? Huh. You know, it's tempting. I might have to sleep on that for a few nights. Give it some thought. Yeah, this segment was very dumb. And it goes beyond everything I just ranted about with Shawn coming back out of the blue like this. They essentially retconned that entire part of the story here. Like, everything we saw in the last month wasn't because of Shawn fucking up their initial plans. They're all just like, hey, Shawn's gonna be Shawn. What are you gonna do? So at the top of the hour, we had Savio come out to kidnap a cameraman. He said that something terrible has happened in the back, and it was so important that it required him coming out to steal a camera guy to come film it. When he said, something terrible has happened, my response was, damn right. It's called Monday Night Raw from July 14th, 1997. Savio out here prophesizing. And of course, as it turns out, the reveal was nothing special. The Boricuas stole one of the DOA's bikes and vandalized it. And then the bikers showed up and got into another fake walk fight with the Mexicans. We also had loud card sirens and nonstop yelling the whole time, which made it about 8 times more horrible and more insufferable than the actual fight. Awful television. Speaking of awful television, Ken Shamrock had a god-awful, horrendous match with Jim Neidhart. Here's everything I wrote down. Shamrock versus Neidhart. This sounds horrendous. It's worse than I expected. Shamrock is trying MMA takedowns with Jim Neidhart in 1997. Neidhart works his 47th chin lock in this 5-minute match. Shamrock gives Neidhart a Hurricane Rana, which then led to a sleeper hold submission for the win. What? Yeah, I don't know what happened at the end there. The best part was when the camera showed Neidhart's reaction after he lost. He just looked so beside himself. Like, goddamn, what am I doing with my life? This was so hilariously bad. At least they had the Patriot come out to save Shamrock from the Bulldog Neidhart attack. They already made Dell look like the spare prick at the wedding twice on this show. May as well have him come out and at least look like somebody the fans can take seriously for a minute. Of course, that lasted all of what? A week? Before they yanked the rug out from under him and made him look like every other jabroni on the roster. Actually, they did that, didn't they? That was like a whole thing. They debuted him, and then the following week there was like an angle or something where he got attacked and laid out like a complete geek. God, these fucking morons. So we were supposed to get the new Blackjacks versus the Road Warriors. But I guess God decided to spare me even more heartache on the show because the match never happened. Instead, we had the Hog Farmers come out and blindside the Road Warriors with chairs. Then they spiked Animal and Hawk on the rampway with a slog drop. Hawk came up bleeding from the back of his head, which immediately gave me the implication that one of the Hog Farmers hard-weighed him with a chair shot. Unsurprising. God, can you imagine being Hawk in this scenario? You make a 15-second cameo on Raw literally just to come out there and get busted open hard way in the back of the head with a fucking chair shot. I'd have quit the business. it is just absolutely remarkable going back and seeing how completely butchered the Road Warriors push was in 1997. It almost seems premeditated. There's no way they're accidentally booking them this poorly. Nobody is that incompetent. Even Russo. This has to be a deliberate burial. I have no other way to rationalize it. I truly forgot just how bad it was, too. Like, I knew about the infamous Road Warriors WWF run in the late 90s. It's so much worse than I remember, dude. So much worse. And of course, literally minutes after we just saw a guy get concussed with an unprotected chair shot to the back of the head, busted open from asshole to appetite, there's Flash Funk in the ring just dancing and shaking his hips, having a good old time. By the way, Vince mentioned the possibility of Hawk suffering a concussion. You think, dude? A possibility, you say? Huh. Yeah, funny. If I didn't know any better, I'd have figured that was pretty apparent. Judging by the giant fucking gash on the back of the guy's head. But it's a possible concussion. Did I mention this show sucks? Might have brought it up a time or two. Vader versus Flash Funk. Following the trend of this week's in-ring action on Raw is War. This match? Also no good. As I expected, having seen Vader versus Flash Funk on paper, seriously, who the fuck thought this was a good idea? Vader versus Flash Funk? Really? Talk about a clash in styles. Beyond that, too, the structure to this match made absolutely no sense. Why the hell is Vader having a 50-50 back and forth match with Flash fucking Funk? Did we not just forget this guy wrestled for the WWF title at the last pay-per-view? Yes, I know he lost. But why is he then coming out on TV a week later and having trouble beating an underneath guy? Sorry to say for anybody that liked Too Cold Scorpio, never had anything against the guy, but let's cut through the bullshit. In the WWF, Flash Funk was an underneath guy. Never been presented any other way. Booking Vader to go back and forth with someone in that division, it did Vader no favors. Vader won with something resembling a jackknife. And then for absolutely no discernible reason, he then laid out Flash with a Vader bomb. Because he needed to get his heat back. Even though he won the match anyway. I don't know what's going on. All I know is, had it not been for the last segment on the show, I think I would have quit the Retro Raw series altogether. Seriously, you have no idea how awful this show was, everybody. Not only did Owen, Bulldog, Austin, and Foley save the show in spades, it wasn't even fucking close. Everything in the final 10 minutes was like I was watching a completely different wrestling program. The stark contrast between the main event and virtually everything else I had seen in the previous 90 minutes, it wasn't even compatible. And the thing that's so absurd is I wouldn't even quantify this main event segment as great. It was memorable. It was the highlight of the show, no question. But if you remember this segment and you remember how it all unfolded, it was quirky as fuck. It was silly and beyond preposterous. God, compared to everything else I've been fed in the previous 2 hours, it was an epic payoff. So again, just to set the stage on what's going on here, it's Owen and Bulldog versus Austin and a mystery partner for the tag titles. Oh, by the way, I don't think I've talked about that yet. Owen and Davey winning that absolutely shitty number one contenders tournament they had going on for the previous month. And again, they did the whole angle last week with Austin turning on Mankind and saying he wanted nothing to do with him as a tag partner. So it led to this week where Austin goes out there and essentially works a handicap match by himself for the first several minutes. And right before the commercial pitch, they cut to the back to show a pair of white wrestling boots making its way toward the ring. The announcers are indicating that's Austin's tag partner, because they apparently would have already had the knowledge that was the case, I guess. Anyway, so Austin's out there getting worked over by the heels. I made a note about the apparent 17-mile radius it took from getting to the locker room out to the ring, because it was taking Austin's partner a hell of a long time to walk from the back to come out to the ring. A good 5 or 6 minutes, in fact. But as we all know in wrestling, timing is everything. And we do eventually get the big reveal on the big screen. Who should show up but Mankind's alter ego, Dude Love, sporting his retro 70s hippie ring gear. He tells Austin that it looks like he could use a hand. And who better than the coolest cat in all the land? Oh, have mercy. And so Dude Love makes his way out, dancing and gyrating down to ringside while Austin is doing everything in his power to keep a straight face. I can only imagine what it would have been like had The Undertaker been involved in all this. I don't know why that thought occurred to me, but it did. That would have been the moment, too. All those years where they tried to get The Undertaker to break kayfabe on camera. The first ever appearance of Dude Love on WWF television. That might have been the one to do it. Good thing he wasn't on camera at the time. Austin, I don't think, was ever recognized for having too many moments of breaking character. But everybody could tell here, he was trying so hard to fight back laughter. And these closing few minutes were just... You know, it's one of those things where it's incredibly stupid when I try and recap it. And I hate to use the cop-out when I say it, but the fact that Mick Foley was doing this, he's the only guy that could have pulled this off. Him coming out the team with Austin in the middle of this match and that fucking getup. Nobody else could have made that work. This is one of those historic Raw moments where you look back and remember why Mick Foley was an all-time great. It's like, yeah, he did a lot of dangerously stupid shit in his career, but nobody else could have pulled off the Dude Love persona. Kind of like how nobody else could have pulled off the Undertaker gimmick. Or the Steve Austin gimmick. Or the Rock gimmick. The list goes on. Mick Foley becoming Dude Love, which is a polar opposite contrast to everything the Mankind gimmick was, which was equally as great. What else can you say? I mean, there is a lot to say about it. But he gets in there and runs wild on the baby faces. Austin's just watching in complete bewilderment on the apron. He wants absolutely nothing to do with tagging in or out. He's just observing everything that's going on. And finally, after Owen tries to cut off Dude Love with a missile dropkick when Foley goes for the mandible claw, the ref is busy dealing with Owen. And so Austin picks that opportunity to hit the ring, give Bulldog the stunner, and then Dude Love crawls on top of Davey and gets the pinfall. And this fucking crowd reaction, you know, I mean, I'm probably not giving Mick Foley enough credit for just how great he was. The fact that the people went absolutely ballistic for this finish, despite all the previous rotten shit they'd been subjected to in the previous 2 hours, when Mick Foley got that pin on the British Bulldog here in the main event, these people popped like they just saw Austin stun McMahon for the first time. It was almost incredible. To think these people had the patience to sit through all that horrible crap for this one moment at the end of the show. That's a testament to how amazing Mick Foley was. And then you get the deal afterward where he goes to hand Austin both sets of tag belts. But then two girls hit the ring to start molesting Foley in the corner. And Austin took one look at that and said, hey, you know, this Dude Love fella ain't so bad. So he gave Dude Love one half of the titles and gave Foley the ring so the girls could do their little stripper dance with him. And you know, watching the closing, we'll call it 5 minutes to the program this week, this is where I concluded. This was the reason the WWF won. It really is that simple of a formula. You can have a complete shit undercard. The majority of your show could absolutely suck cock. But by God, as long as your main event picture has stars that the people care about, and you send the people home happy, the rest doesn't matter. People will continue to come back and watch. This is an absolutely iconic Raw segment. You're not just hearing it from me. People still, to this day, fans that no longer even watch the product religiously, if at all, they still remember the Dude Love Steve Austin segment from Raw in 1997. All these years later. And to me, the whole thing is hilarious because, in retrospect, it was an absolutely preposterous segment. But it was legendary enough to where people still remember it and talk about it years later. There's not a single fucking thing else worth mentioning on this godforsaken show of importance. But that Dude Love reveal at the end, when he came out to help Austin retain the tag belts on Monday Night Raw, I mean, it's still considered like one of the top 3 moments of the Monday Night Wars. I mean, what else do you say about it? Only Mick. He's the only reason it got over. And the other thing, too, you think about, this Dude Love gimmick, it actually wasn't around for that long. A few months, right? Then he ends up coming back as Mankind and Cactus Jack later in the year. I mean, there will be Dude Love cameos over time, but in terms of like the full-fledged gimmick running its course, it was basically for about 4 or 5 months, if that. And the people loved it. And the crazy thing is, when Mick was working as the Dude Love gimmick, he wasn't doing anything outrageously dangerous in the ring. He wasn't taking 20-foot falls off the top of cells or getting hit in the back of the head with chair shots. He was just being a wacky gimmick. And it makes you think, how many more years could Foley have gotten out of his career if he would have just done this for about a year? Instead of doing the Mankind stuff where he's getting bashed in the head with chairs and taking bumps through thumbtacks and cutting himself open. Could have gotten more longevity out of his career. His body wouldn't have been so beat up. People loved him regardless. It never mattered what persona Foley wrestled under. It's not like one gimmick was less over than the other. People loved everything about Foley. He really could have milked this for longer. And he would have stuck the course. There's more food for thought. And you really think, too, the genius of everything about it. This was never supposed to happen originally. This whole Austin Dude Love storyline, they never planned for this to happen. They didn't plan for Shawn to walk out when he did. This was a last-minute backup plan because they needed to throw something together in a few weeks. That's what makes it so extraordinary. Another prime example of all the idiot marks out there that say, pro wrestling doesn't have enough long-term booking. The fuck? Long-term booking. It's one of the most idiotic things I've ever heard in my life. You think half the shit in the Attitude Era was long-term? I mean, yeah, there was a lot of bad stuff that happened, but even the good stuff. You think the WWF was thinking 12 to 18 months out of the block for any of this stuff to happen? Give me a break. Bunch of numbskulls. I mean, everything about the last 10 minutes saved the show. I know I say it like every week, but this was easily another candidate for all-time terrible Raws. Take away the main event. The first hour and a half was fucking Saw levels of torture, dude. I'm not exaggerating anything. You need to go watch the first 90 minutes to just truly understand how awful Raw was this week. Let me repeat the matches they booked, so you all can understand what it was I had to experience. This is what they came up with in advance. Jerry Lawler and Brian Christopher versus Ivan and Scott Putski. Boring and pointless. Taka Michinoku versus Tajiri, which is the only good wrestling match on the entire show. The Headbangers versus the fucking Bariquas. Goddamn horrible. Shamrock versus the Anvil. Atrocious. The LOD New Blackjacks angle, wherein the end result was a guy getting concussed with a botched chair shot. Vader versus Flash Funk. Hideous. And then the main event. I hate to rain on your parade. Y'all can think this was a great period if you want. I'm here to inform you, having gone back and relived a good chunk of this Raw timeline at the start of the Monday Night Wars. I'm not just talking 97, I'm talking even the previous year and a half. It's pretty bad. Objectively speaking, these shows are hideously appalling. Usually you'll get like one or two really good segments on a show, and the rest is just bad. Overbooked, overwritten, badly acted shit. That's what Raw's War is right now in 1997. There's 1,500 things happening in 2 hours with random guys. And then there's everything involving Austin, Brett, Foley, and, to a lesser extent, Paul Bearer and The Undertaker. And I'm by no means a fan of the Undertaker-Paul Bearer storyline. But at least that's consistent. Give it a couple more months. Once the booking team becomes primarily McMahon and Russo, and it's Russo piecing together most of the weekly shows, you think it's a muddled mess now? Dude, you ain't seen nothing yet. It gets so much worse. But there you go. Go watch the last 10 minutes of the show this week. Skip everything else. Or better yet, watch it. And understand that I'm not exaggerating when I talk about how awful it was. Maybe next week will be better. Or maybe not. But that'll wrap up this one. And folks, I appreciate everybody that comes back to check out the show every week. And we will be back this coming Friday. Indeed, we will be. And this weekend's going to be a little bit of a crapshoot. I do still plan on doing a Raw review next week, but I might have to cram things in later in the afternoon. It might put a damper on the following week's Friday show. I'll have to see if I have time to watch all the shows. We'll find out. But I'll figure that out in the next several days. But I'll talk to you all soon, and take care, everybody. Peace out.